Shalom, I'm Baruch Gordon from the beautiful Beit Midrash of Beit El, Israel. Some religious Jews ridicule Israel Independence Day, saying, how can you invent a holiday on the Jewish calendar? The holidays are set down in the Holy Torah, or the holidays of Purim and Hanukkah were later added by a special assembly of rabbis thousands of years ago. But today, to institute a Jewish holiday, you can make it a national holiday, but how are you to invent a Jewish holiday on the Jewish calendar?
Came about. And we have to remember that this celebration of the Israeli Independence Day does not celebrate Jewish religion. It does not celebrate Judaism. It does not celebrate the teachings of our religious leaders from all generations. It does not celebrate the tradition of our ancestors.
We're going to see a verse in this week's Parsha that says, wrong. It's perfectly in line with Jewish law and tradition to add a holiday to the Jewish calendar under these circumstances. The Torah in Bamidbar chapter 10 talks about the trumpets, the chatzotzrot, that were used in desert times and also to be used in later generations. It says, for example, in verse 9, that when an enemy is attacking you, you're to sound the chatzotzrot to arouse divine mercy, to invoke salvation from God. Then comes Bamidbar chapter 10, verse 10. Boom. It says that we're to use the trumpets to sound them on 3 occasions. The second occasion that's mentioned is B'moadechem, on your holidays. The third occasion that's mentioned is B'rashei Chodshechem, on the first of the month, which is like a minor Jewish holiday. What's the first occasion? It says B'yom Simchatchem, the day of your rejoicing. Well, what day is that? We already mentioned the holidays. The famous 12th century commentator, the Ibn Ezra, he explains, and I quote, when you return from enemy lands, or you're victorious over enemies who attacked you in your land, you must establish a day of rejoicing like Purim and Hanukkah. That's pretty straightforward. In fact, there's a book called The Jewish Laws of Independence Day and Jerusalem Day. The very first sentence of that book, in the first article, brings down this commentary of the Ibn Ezra, that we must establish a day of rejoicing when we're victorious over our enemies. Furthermore, in the later article in that book, written by the famous posek, a decider of Jewish law from Bnei Brak, his name was Rabbi Sraya Divlivsky. He says there that it was the custom of Jewish communities all over the world to establish days of rejoicing, which they called a Purim of that community. He says there's at least 80 of those that have been established. So, for example, the Purim of Frankfurt, they would not fast, they would feast on that day and recite Hallel, and it would be a special day of rejoicing. As an example, he asked, what was the miracle that happened in Frankfurt? He says there was a rumor that the Goyim of that town might perpetrate a pogrom against the Jews on the 20th of the Jewish month of Adar. When that day passed and nothing happened, the rabbis established for generations, they instituted the Purim of Frankfurt, a day to be celebrated where that salvation occurred to us, that nothing happened. In other words, the Goyim didn't attack us. Even the Khatam Sofer, a famous Jewish legal scholar, he was born in Frankfurt 100 years after that incident. He meticulously celebrated that day. When he later moved to Pressburg, he continued to celebrate it, he and his family. So here's a man who was born 100 years after there was a threat that the Goyim might perpetrate an attack against the Jews, and when it didn't happen, he's now moved out of the town, but because he was a native of that town, he continues to celebrate that day of rejoicing. Rav Divlivsky says, can we possibly compare those circumstances to what happened to the Jewish nation here in Israel in the Independence War? We were saved from annihilation. There were soldiers from 7 Arab nations that invaded Israel to wipe us out to the last Jew. That was part of their rhetoric. So Rav Sraya Divlivsky says, under these circumstances, it's fully obligatory for every Jewish community and every synagogue to establish a day of rejoicing for the Independence War and the miracles that occurred there, and to celebrate that day by reciting the Hallel in full. So this week, when you hear the Parsha read in the synagogue, when you come to Bamidbar, chapter 10, verse 10, be sure to look at the commentary of the Ibn Ezra. And next year, when Independence Day and Jerusalem Day roll around, be sure to join the celebrations. Shalom from Beit El. Hey, you like Israel? You like Torah? Sign up for our Israel National Torah newsletter at the link on the screen.